This is the Lakefront Film Festival 2021, and we are doing our Let's Get Critical panel again because you loved it so much. But of course, we've got three to four new panelists for this year to talk about the scenes that make the movies. These are the quintessential scenes that make films great. I'm Shireen Nicole, and I am joined by, I'm just going to kind of go clockwise, and I'll start with Kevin. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kevin McCarthy. I'm a film critic here in the Washington, D.C. area for WTTG Fox 5. And obviously, I know Grae and Wilson really well through the press junket circuit. I've known them for years. So it's an honor to be on with Grae and Wilson. And Sharon, nice to meet you. But yeah, so I'm just a film journalist. I cover press junkets and film reviews, and just honored to be here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. How about you, Wilson?
Well, Wilson Rouse, editor of Black Film and TV, been doing this for nearly over 20 years. I too know the other two are here, Grae and Kevin. And it's been a while since I actually been on a panel where we can just talk about film and we're seeing each other as opposed to being on the phone and talking for hours on end. So it's good to see everybody back again.
Yeah, we're going to drop those jewels on the whole audience now. Great.
Hello, I'm Grae Drake, and over the years, I have been the former senior editor of Rotten Tomatoes, Ms. Movie Phone. I review movies on radio stations all over the country and also work as a film critic here in Los Angeles. And it is so fun to be on a panel like this with my buddies because this is what we love to do. It's just to talk about what makes movies great. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And yeah, so and also we get to argue a little bit if we want to. So that's the setup. Each panelist will present a scene, we'll watch the scene, they'll tell us why it's great, and then we will debate that. Or, well, you guys will, I will be quiet, but you will all debate that or agree with it. And so we have a fun one starting up. And of course, we're hoping to be joined by Carla Renata if she is available. Thanks, Matt Damon. So let's jump into that first scene.
In terms of the assignment here, I originally thought and read it as like a scene that was personal to me, but versus more of an iconic scene in cinema. But this I think now that Sharon and I have discussed in an email, that it kind of fits into both because the film itself that I chose is incredibly iconic and, in my opinion, one of the greatest movies or the greatest movie ever. And for me personally, just because of what it does emotionally, tonally, action-wise, and elements like that. So the scene that I chose is from Terminator 2: Judgment Day. And I didn't choose the Hasta la Vista baby scene or I'll be back or trust me or some of the more famous one-liners from the film. It was a scene that just meant a lot to me personally because when I was 8 years old, I begged my parents to watch Terminator 2 because I had seen the trailers on TV, and I was blown away by just the visuals from the trailer on whatever small television we had in our house. I mean, this is the 90s, 1991. So, the quality wasn't even that great, but what I had seen on television blew me away so much that I was like, I need to see that movie. And some history behind that is that I always grew up loving magic. I always wanted to be a magician. So I always collected different magician type things. And I think that's what led me down my path of loving films, because if you think about it, a filmmaker is a magician. A filmmaker is pulling all these different things together to create an illusion that makes you believe what you're watching is real. And if they do their job correctly, they've immersed you in the environment and suspended your disbelief enough where you believe what you're watching, right? So the scene that hit me was I was 8 years old. I begged my parents to let me watch the film. They went out to see it in theaters to make sure it was okay for me to see it until it came out on VHS. And when it came out on VHS, we rented it, and I sat in between my mom and dad and I watched this film. Now, when the scene came on, it was truly my film awakening. Like, it was the moment that I genuinely fell in love with movies. I didn't understand fully what I was comprehending because I was only 8 years old, but I knew that what I was seeing was so beyond anything I'd ever experienced before that I just wanted to know how it was done. So I'll set it up that way, and then let's roll the scene, and then we'll come back and discuss it.
Hey, Gwen, you want some coffee?
No, thanks. How about a beer?
Yeah, right. Hey, I got a full house.
That's good, Louis.
Must be my lucky day.
So before the stabbing violent moment there, which is obviously like an iconic moment as well. The sound design in that scene, there's a couple different things I want to get into, but first of all, that scene is 1991. That scene is 29 years, or are we? Oh no, we're 30 years now on that scene, which is astounding to think about. If you think about the visual effects that you're watching in that moment, that's 30 years ago. I would argue that scene looks better than some of the visual effects we're seeing in major motion pictures today. And that was Industrial Light and Magic at that point. So, James Cameron and that scene in particular, it's all sound design and visual effects. So I don't know if we could hear it in the audio initially, but as he initially steps over the sticky part of the floor, which is where the T-1000 is going to come up from the floor, that sound design is what makes that feel real, because you feel like there's something there. It must be the T-1000 or something, because we know the liquid metal aspect of it. We know that he can turn into objects and other human beings. Not stabbing weapons or firing weapons, right? As what Arnold says in the film at one point. But that scene, when he rose up, Robert Patrick's character rose up from the floor. I didn't understand how to process it. I'd never seen anything like it, and I know Cameron had done like water visual effects in The Abyss a few years back, but this was so far beyond anything I'd ever seen before. Not only does he come up, when he transfers into the security officer, the visual effect there is still flawless. Like, it's seamless, how he steps into himself and then over to the guy. Cool little side note about that scene is that those security officers are actual twins in real life. The actor's name is Don Stanton, who plays the real security officer who's at the actual vending machine. His twin brother's the one who walks up. So the visual effect really isn't that complicated. It's really just Industrial Light and Magic playing with the visual effect of T-1000 coming out of the ground, and then it's all performance based. So if you think about it, it's really all about the design of what the filmmaker pulled off there from an illusion standpoint. And that was the moment I fell in love with cinema. It changed everything for me. It was the moment I wanted to know how movies were made. It sparked my entire life in terms of film, and it's why I am doing what I'm doing today. That film and that scene.
Well, let's see what the panel has to say. What say you, Pam?
Man, James Cameron every time with stuff like this. Like, when you look back at his movies, I would argue that from a story standpoint, they're often simple but elegant. And he always makes sure that he's hitting hard on the visuals, because you're absolutely right. Like, it's an amazing effect. It's so effective. And in the movies, like the first time you see it, you're like, behind you. And then when you figure out what he's up to, you're like, I get chills just thinking about it. It's so brutal and cutthroat and so Robert Patrick T-1000. Like, that dude is so terrifying. Like, the nicest dude in real life.
Yeah. He's a really scary villain. The T-1000 is like one of the best, I would argue, horror monsters. And I know Terminator 2 is not a horror film, but when you think about, like Grae said, there's such you could argue that maybe the scene with the milk carton is even more iconic, when T-1000 becomes the foster parent mother. And she's on the phone with John Connor and Arnold, and and this is basically the scene where Edward Furlong finds out that his foster parents are dead, which is how Arnold delivers the line, "Your foster parents are dead." But the arm going into the milk carton into Todd's throat and then out, and then becoming back to her arm and then back into the T-1000. I mean, these were seamless shots. You could argue the scene when T-1000 walks out of the fiery wreck of the truck and becomes T-1000 again after becoming silver. So it's like those scenes, but to Grae's point, emotionally, The reason why that film worked for me is because I emotionally connected so well with the characters and the story that that scene becomes more effective because I'm more immersed in the world. So it's really a combination of just great storytelling, and then you just have a really cool effect that works because you buy into it. But alone, that scene just now, as we watched it alone, it works. I mean, that's 1991. It's 30 years ago. It's crazy.
Well, and also like
Wilson, because we're running out of time for this segment, for this scene.
Sorry.
Wilson, no, that's okay. Well, Wilson, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, like I said, you talk about early camera, and I'm thinking back to Aliens and The Abyss and a film, and James has a way of making sure that one shot, like even in that scene where you see him pointed out, you think about his other films in which he's done that, where he makes sure that the camera centers, whether it be the alien in there or the creatures in the abyss, you're getting it. And like you think about 30 years ago, he was doing it when nobody else was as much. I'm not sure if that was part of THX. Is it?
It may have been, yeah, it may have been, because that was the early ILM. But you're talking about THX sound, like sound design. Yeah, I mean, I think there may have. I think THX may have been at that point. I'm not sure.
But with that, I'm not going to argue with that scene because talking about a film that everybody of all the Terminators, we all remember 1 and 2. Can't say 3, 4, 5. It's like you talk to Terry Crews and like he was in Terminator. Which one? It's like the one you saw me dying, but you never saw my body.
Oh yeah, it is. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And I'm saying T2 also works on its own in a weird way, and this is where I'll end it. Cameron's brilliant with exposition as well, because if you think about Terminator 2, the first one came out in 84, this one's 91, so you're talking 7 years later. So you have an audience who may not even know what T1 is, or like people like me who was 8 years old at the time and had never seen T1 but sat down to watch T2. There's a great scene when the doctor's walking to Linda Hamilton's room in the hospital, and the doctor's showing off other doctors about the hospital. He tells the entire Terminator 1 story in that walk. And it was a natural way to do it because the character he was explaining to needed to know the backstory anyway. So the audience then becomes the listening aspect of that. And then we are told all the story we need to know from an exposition standpoint in a necessary way, where it doesn't feel like they're pounding it over your head to say, remember this, remember this, remember this. It's just a brilliant film on all accounts.
Yeah. It is definitely unforgettable. I always remember the cop scene where he gets off the bike, and yeah, the liquid metal did something for me too. So we're taking a big shift now. We're gonna go super classic with Grae's choice. Grae, tell us all about it.
Okay, so this clip is from the incredible 1950 film Sunset Boulevard. Directed by the great Billy Wilder, starring an unbelievable Gloria Swanson, just over the top spectacular. And also the basic story is just that William Holden is this down on his luck screenwriter who happens to stumble across this kind of creepy silent movie star who's slowly fading into oblivion. And he starts working on her project, which is like to revitalize her career. And he quickly realizes that, as so many things in Hollywood are, once you get it, you start to question whether or not you really wanted it. And so this is the final scene from that film. So spoiler alert, sorry, but you should definitely watch the movie if you haven't. And this is finally when the police have discovered that Gloria Swanson's character has done something super bad, and she is going to get locked up in the slammer for it, but in a specifically Hollywood way.
Cameras. Action! So they were turning after all. Those cameras. Life, which can be strangely merciful, had taken pity on Norma Desmond. The dream she had clung to so desperately had enfolded her.
go on with the scene. I'm too happy. Mr. DeMille, do you mind if I say a few words? Thank you. I just want to tell you all how happy I am to be back in the studio, making a picture again. You don't know how much I've missed all of you. And I promise you I'll never desert you again. Because after Salome, we'll make another picture and another picture. You see, this is my life. It always will be. There's nothing else. Just us. And the cameras. And those wonderful people out there in the dark. All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Oh my God, I just love every psychotic second of this. So this movie is not only, it's a perfect example of like what, you know, German directors were doing with postmodernism and how the movie works on its own, but at the same time, once you know a little bit about it, it just becomes that much more incredible. So without knowing the backstory to this film, the reason that I love that scene is because this woman has been used up by Hollywood, but there's still some show there for her. And there's still all of these people that are still willing to indulge her in her complete psychotic vision, you know, and that's Hollywood.
That's the privilege of it, right? You can get arrested doing your swan song.
That's right. Like, no matter how far you fall, there's going to be someone that's interested in indulging you when you're falling. And so I think that the camera work it's so elegant. It's just like Gloria Swanson using her hands and like constantly this woman making these crazy eyes, and it just works. And her commitment to the performance is sensational. But fun facts, the man that was running the camera was not Cecil B. DeMille. That was her psychotic vision. It's actually an actor named Erich von Stroheim, who was also a very noteworthy German actor and then writer-director. He had also worked with Gloria Swanson in the past. It didn't go great, by the way. And so Billy Wilder put all these people in this movie. There's a whole scene with a bunch of old silent film stars playing cards. And Gloria Swanson actually is sort of the person in real life that she was playing in the film. Like, she was responsible for the success of Paramount Pictures during the silent era. She also was like, at the time, had sort of quit acting. And Billy Wilder said, trust me, this movie's going to be amazing. And thank God she took him up on it. I think it's just works on so many levels. I dare you to say this is a bad scene. Go ahead.
Okay, well, panel, the challenge is down. Who accepts?
I mean, I'll just say, it's an iconic scene. It's an amazing film. What's beautiful about that scene is how relevant it is now. And I think, like, obviously, to what Grae was saying, like, that scene outside of the black and white aspect of it, and you can tell it's like almost like an old school soundtrack. I'm assuming a mono soundtrack. It sounds and looks like an older film, but if I had somehow seen that like cleaned up some way or done in a modern way, I would say everything about that scene from a dialogue perspective and everything that thematically seems today. It seems like the scene could have been made today. I also want to point out just how beautiful the shot is. The shadows on the back of the wall as she's walking down the stairs, there's something interesting about that metaphorically as well. And just,
also,
playing with the camera.
A super German thing, by the way. Like,
super
German expressionism, like shadows on the wall, very dramatic. Please continue. It's so exciting.
No, I agree with you. Like that, the camera work in that scene and the shadows and the lighting clearly play into the themes of the actual character in the moment. So, like, and I know that sounds like it's easier said than done. in terms of like filmmakers, you'd think a director is going to have everything in the frame speak to the themes of the film, but it doesn't happen like that all the time. You can just tell as you're watching that scene that every single inch of the frame is important in terms of the themes of what's happening with that walk. And just, you know, like you said, it's so timeless. And I love how she plays with the camera. But I'm a sucker for movies about movies. Huge sucker for movies about movies, and just seeing the camera on screen, a movie being made within the film we're watching. And you know, that's 1950, like you said. So it's just cool to see that back then. So
okay, so I want to jump in and say one thing that really caught me about this film is the way that Gloria Swanson as Norma Desmond. First of all, the childlike quality to her voice, which tells you that she's fully gone, right? And but also the way she's reaching for you and she's saying, you out there in the dark. And there's just this really disquieting, right?
It is. And you know that it's one of the first well-known circumstances of breaking the fourth wall, where she is looking directly at the camera. And that was, I think, a very deliberate choice because of how it made you feel. Like, I was right there with you. I get goosebumps thinking about it. I'm like, oh, this is messed up that we're watching this. But like, that's reality TV now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It is uncomfortable in a very strange way. It's a very it's such a personal moment. Like, it feels so personal to the audience, even though you know everyone else is watching it. So,
and Carla Renata has joined us. Hi, Carla.
Hello, hello, hello. You know, junket life. That's how we roll.
That's how we roll. Making jokes about that, like Kimmel's closing. Thanks, Matt Damon.
Yes, honey. That's who I was waiting for, was Matt Damon. I was like, dude, can you come off that 10-hour break? Let's just do it. Come on now.
So we're going to have you introduce yourself in the next segment because we'll do your film. But how do you feel about this scene from Sunset Boulevard?
Carla, crazy ladies descending stairs. Go.
I think the best part about that scene is her overall physical energy from her toes all the way up through her eyeballs as she's descending down the stairs. And then that camera kind of comes in on her and fuzzes out, because in that moment that the lens is fuzzing out, you also realize that her mind has fuzzed out. Like she's gone. And so that scene kind of says everything and nothing at all, really, because it's kind of like, ooh, is she crazy, or is she making us think she's crazy? Because, you know, sometimes people like that can be crazy like a fox. Or is she just so caught up in that yesteryear accolades that she got as this big movie star that it totally took her out? And it also speaks to that mindset of celebrity, you know, and we see celebrity in a very different way now than what they were seeing then. You know what I mean? There was no social media, you know, they've barely had gossip rags then. And how celebrity kind of completely engulfs you and in some ways determines who you think you are. Some people let the celebrity determine who they think they are, as opposed to the celebrity being something that's kind of over there and part of their persona and their lives. In this instance, she let it define who she was as a whole entire person, which ultimately supposedly drives her mad.
And fun fact, speaking of gossip rags, Hedda Hopper, one of the most famous gossip journalists, is in the film, one of the bridge players, and along with like Buster Keaton and all these amazing people. And it always makes me chuckle. Once I figured out who she was, I was like, ooh, girl, she wished she had collected this dirt.
That's funny. That's funny.
You had that studio system which kind of crafted image at that point. And so they were stuffing these actors and actresses into these like molds and changing their names. And you can kind of see how that versus what you were saying, Carla, now, where your image is almost completely created by you, curated in every moment of your life.
And it's really curated through social media.
Yes.
Is coupled with you kind of like pushing your brand out there, but social media and the people that comment within the confines of social media also help build what that image is. Look at what's happening with Britney Spears.
Absolutely.
You know,
Wilson, our anchor once again.
It's been a minute since I saw that film, and as I watched it, you know, I'm looking at all the stuff that you guys have mentioned, but I'm also paying attention to the music, you know, and I used to run a radio show called Soundtrack, so I'm paying attention to how the music also sold the movies back then. You know, they always had, you know, you actually had to have that one scene, that one score that kind of signifies how the scene is going to go. And I'm looking up, it was Frank Waxman. And I can't think of what else he's probably done, but that's what sells it. You know, when you're looking at a scene and then you have the score, everybody looks at movies for different things, whether it's the acting or the background. For me, for a good period of time, I used to think about, you know, there's always those movies that you love. It may not be great because of the music, because of the background music that you never pay attention to. And here with that particular scene, you see that the score come in with what's going on, and you're either looking at it for different perspectives.
So true. All right. Well, so we all said yay to that scene. And now, Carla, my fellow Howard University Bison, ain't you?
You know.
Please introduce.
Don't get two Howard people in the same room or same screen. It's just a situation. Just get used to it.
It's just how we do.
I love Howard, so I'm up. I'm all in. So
we're fans.
So please introduce yourself and then your scene.
Okay, so I am Carla Renata, aka the Curvy Film Critic. As you already have surmised, I am a graduate of Howard University, the School of Communications. And I have a podcast that streams every Sunday at 5 p.m. via YouTube and Facebook Live called The Curvy Critic with Carla Renata. My reviews and op-eds and whatnot have been seen in Variety, RogerEbert.com, and of course, my own site, thecurvyfilmcritic.com. So the scene that I chose to discuss today is from one of my all-time favorite movies. I swear I've seen this film probably more than 1,000 times in my lifetime. It's called The Godfather. Is written, the screenplay is written and it's directed by Francis Ford Coppola. It's based on a book by Mario Puzo. And Puzo, that last scene in The Godfather, that very, very final scene is everything you need to know about Godfather 1, 2, and 3. It kind of sets up the whole trilogy that we're about to encompass and experience. It sets up the relationship between the brothers. You understand what brother is in what hierarchy in that family. You understand how important family is. You understand how how Italian families don't necessarily respect women unless they're the matriarch of the family, because you see how they treat Connie. They're like, oh, Connie, whatever. And then they kind of pawn her off on Carlo, who ends up being a whole mess by himself later on. And you also see the beginnings of what's going to happen with Michael Corleone. Michael Corleone they tease him, call him college boy. They say all kinds of stuff to him. And then there's that discussion between him and Tom about what Tom and Vito have been planning for Michael's future. And you like, oh, that's how, so subconsciously, Michael Corleone didn't want to be in the life, but subconsciously he ended up being in the life by no fault of his own. You get all of that in that final scene of The Godfather. And I have never seen a film that has given you so much under subtext in like a 4 or 5 minute block than that scene in The Godfather does.
Michael, is it true?
Don't ask me about my business, Kate.
Is it true?
Don't ask me about my business.
No.
This one time. This one time, I'll let you ask me about my affairs.
Is it true?
No.
I guess we both need a drink, huh? Come on.
Don Corleone.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that
Chills.
look, when did y'all peep this? Because I think this is probably, as many times as I've seen this movie, this is probably the first time that I peeped this. He gives her that opportunity to ask him that question, and you hear a clock ticking in the background. It's like a ticking time bomb waiting to go. His whole attitude is like a ticking time bomb waiting to go off, because there's that palpable, huge amount of silence between the time he says, okay, you can ask me this one time about my affairs, and then she does. And you hear that clock going tick, 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 until she asks the question and he answers it. And then all of a sudden the clock stops ticking, which tells you that their whole relationship, their whole life is nothing but a ticking time bomb. And baby, when that door closes, when that door closes with the hand kissing talking about Don Corleone, you know, you're like, oh, so he basically just lied to her face and had no shame in his game. You're like, is this how the movie gonna end? Really? Is that what we gonna do? Okay, I can't.
Well, when you want to talk about sound design, as you pointed out, that ticking clock, which is counterbalanced or kind of pushing up his barely contained menace, right? Because you're waiting for him to explode, and that clock feels like a fuse that's been lit, and you don't know where this is going to go, all the way through to the sound design of that door. And the sliding of the darkness and the closing of that final click. Oh, yes. So you already know my vote. Please, panel.
You can't go wrong with Godfather.
Yes, Bison, have a sister's back.
You can't go wrong with The Godfather. Obviously, every scene you could mention any scene, and I'm sure they've dissected it left and right. Especially when you talk about Godfather 1, you know, all of them, those things stand out. Especially, you know, you had talked about the scene where they, you know, that was I don't remember if that was the final scene, because remember they had the flashback scene.
That's the final one.
Yeah, I said that, and I meant to say flashback instead of final. My bad.
Okay, you know, so yeah, obviously it's like you knew he was going to lie to her. He was like, "Oh, you could ask me," and he was just like, "Hey, you know," part of his like, "I'm just going, yeah, it wasn't me," you know, it wasn't me. And then you see everybody else's, and then you see it through the other films where somebody gets anointed and he's the Godfather. That's it. But back in the '70s, this is how they wrote those roles where like, okay, the woman ain't gonna say anything. You know, it's like, oh, you didn't do that, really? It's like, yeah. You know, they're more honest. Today they're more smart to know.
But let me just interject and say that you're right. They did write women's roles like that in those types of films. But the thing that made Kate as Diane Keaton different is that she actually had the nerve to ask the question, because there are films where they would say, okay, you can ask me the question, and they would write her to go, never mind, and she'd go on about her business. But Miss Thing asked the question. She's like, okay, you gonna let me stand here and ask the question? Then I'm gonna ask the question. But you can see in her eyes, in her whole posture, that she is, because he just had an explosion 2 seconds before that. You can see that she's waiting for him to slap the hell out of her. for even having the gall to ask that question and question his authority as the head of that family. I was like, "Ooh, girl."
But she needs the lie. She needs it, right?
Yeah, I mean, she's gonna be sorry, and I think that moment comes even just 30 seconds later, and the intensity between those two actors is amazing to watch. And I always think about what it must be like to be a performer on set and just be that in the zone with your other performer, where it's like it almost feels like the rest of the world has fallen away for those two and they're so locked in on each other. And I think the camera work really reflects that they're very connected, and you're seeing a considerable over the shoulder shot of Kate when you're seeing Michael Corleone, and they're very connected in that moment. And then it even goes so far as to have Kate in the foreground as you've got Michael all the way in the study, and they're together, they're still with each other. And then the minute those dudes come in and they start messing stuff up, the door shuts, they're disconnected again, and that's how they're going to stay for the rest of their marriage, because that is the path he's chosen. And this movie, like that part makes me talk a lot to the screen.
Girl, don't it make everybody talk a lot to the screen? You're like, no, he didn't. Ooh, girl, what you gonna do? Like, yeah, it's one of those moments for sure.
I'm like, Kate, make it a double.
Kevin, you're Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the two things that I wrote down during the scene have already been covered. So essentially, the ticking of the clock. But in terms of camera work, what Grae brought up, which I found interesting about that scene, is as Diane Keaton gets down the hallway or down the other room, essentially, and we're seeing the other characters, she's out of focus while they're in focus, and it's like it's her being even more distanced from the situation. So I mean, essentially, what Grae was saying, but that's kind of like, as I watched the scene again, I realized how that she is so out of focus in that scene because she's so disconnected from them, as you mentioned, Grae. So yeah, those are my two points that I was going to bring up that I wrote down, but you already covered them. So
you know what I wonder, by the way, after reading Robert Evans' autobiography, The Kid Stays in the Picture. So he produced that film. And according to him, and he's like obviously like a huge personality and a big Hollywood producer or whatever, he claims that Francis Ford Coppola's cut of the film was a wreck. And he said the material was all there. He shot it, but he didn't do it right. And I always wonder how much involvement Robert Evans really had in all of these great moments, because The Godfather's a legendary film for a reason. I always just wonder that to myself, like, was this Bob?
Girl, I can tell you unequivocally, as someone who worked briefly with Robert Evans when he was alive, he's a control freak. So I'm sure he had a lot more to do with that film than we'll ever know.
Oh my God. Okay, so we need a sidebar after this.
I have to ask you guys to come back so we can do a extra innings kind of thing when we have more time.
Yeah.
But you know, it's funny because just one quick thing I want to mention before we go to Wilson's scene, and that is a friend of mine said, could you make The Godfather today? And I said to him, that's not a question you can ask, right? Because The Godfather is a Nexus film. You cannot have the gangster films that we have, you know, everything that comes after it is hugely influenced by The Godfather. You can't remove it from the timeline, or else the timeline of those types of films completely falls apart.
Yeah, because I mean, even gangster films before then weren't like this. They were just like pop, pop, bang, bang, good guys, bad guys. It was very simplistic, and you're right that this is totally different.
Yeah. So I have to say, going into Wilson's film, that you guys have picked films that are so very me. I don't know if I was like influencing you or something, but from the huge science fiction action adventures to the very like visceral types of classic films to just the whole Godfather franchise, which you just, you know, stare at and wonder, to what Wilson will tell us about next, which is woo!
My choice is Training Day. Obviously, you know, it's turning 30 years old this year, you know, and when we saw it, I remember at the time, you know, people always wondered whether or not Denzel could play the bad guy. You know, he was always great from the 80s, the 90s. And when Training Day came, no one knew who Antoine Fuqua was. You know, he'd done a replacement but he didn't get no shine for that. He didn't get shine for that movie he did, Bait, with Jamie Foxx, you know, and you got a young David Ayer. And this was the first gritty movie that David Ayer got put out before he started doing the other films that he would be known for. You know, and when we saw Training Day, and I remember, I never forget being in the theaters watching this, and we know what everybody knows what Denzel could deliver. But then when you see him go throughout this movie playing the bad guy, people don't know what they're going to see. And then you have young Ethan Hawke, you know, who's playing a little bit against type. But just to see Denzel giving that command of performance as this, you know, he's not redeemable. He is who he is. You know, you're thinking he's going to change throughout this whole time. And then the scene I chose, which is we all seen it, the King Kong. Everybody always knows that scene, you know. And if you look at it, Terry Crews is in that scene. And I've talked to Terry Crews afterwards, and he was like, he said, I remember him telling me that when they shot that scene, it was a whole bunch of people there. And he was like, he knew of Denzel, but then but to be in that scene, and I think he said they did it in less than a few takes in the films that he's seen, you know, take after take. But Antoine likes to be gritty. And I guess him and Denzel must have talked beforehand. So when then Denzel did it, they did it in a few takes. They didn't do it like it'll take 2 hours to get this scene done. You know, it's the scene obviously where he's being cornered and Ethan Hawke has the hand on him, and none of the gang members, which Denzel's character Alonzo has a grip on in the whole area because they're all afraid of him because they don't want to go back to jail. He has this power over them. And when they see this young white guy has, you know, got the up on him, you know, and they're all like, if this young cat can go up against him, so could we all if we combine our, you know, our unit together. And then when you see Denzel being betrayed by his so-called quote unquote community, he goes into that whole speech, and that's where David Ayer comes in. And you know the lines, you know, from King Kong. Take it away, video.
You want to go home? I want to go home, Jake. Come on, give me the money and let me go home. Yeah. You want to go home? Yeah, let me go home, Jake. Come on, give me the money and let me go home. Give me the money and let me go home. Let me go home, Jake. That's right, come on, Jake. You don't deserve this. Okay, you motherfucker.
Jake, go ahead and bounce on me. Get up out of here. We got your back.
What?
Just like that.
Oh, no, you didn't. Wait a minute. No, you did. Hey, Jake! Hey! Jake! 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 Come back here! Jake! You disloyal, fool-ass, bitch-made punk. Jake! I need my money! Jake! Oh, you motherfuckers. Okay. All right. I'm putting cases on all you bitches. Huh? You think you can do this shit? Jay! You think you can do this to me? You motherfuckers will be playing basketball in Pelican Bay when I get finished with you. Shoe program, nigga. 23-hour lockdown. I'm the man up in this piece. You'll never see the light of day. Who the fuck you think you fucking with? I'm the police. I run shit here. You just live here. Yeah, that's right. You better walk away. Go on, walk away, because I'm going to burn this motherfucker down. King Kong ain't got shit on me.
You know, Antoine said that they actually recruited some former Crips and Bloods for that scene. In that scene, I don't know if you know him, Carla, T-Bone, the one who picked up the gun, he became a better actor after that. He's a former Crip.
Yeah, I remember him. Yeah, absolutely. I remember him. Look, this is the one thing that stands out to me in that scene. that moment in the beginning of the clip where the camera pans down to Denzel's badge on his chest and Ethan Hawke snatches it off of him, that was the impetus that made him go completely off. And then when the hood went back on him, when the hood didn't back a brother up, and then he was like, oh, y'all go, not only are you gonna let this white boy take my badge, the thing that's been protecting you fools, but then you gonna roll over on me too, really? And then he just verbally loses his mind over all of that. But it was that badge being snatched off of him, which I think was the instigation for him going completely off and being desperate, because now he knows he's desperate. Now he knows he doesn't have this money. Now he knows he can't make this drop on time, and it's about to go down.
And it's wild to mention that. Oh, sorry, Kevin. But just really quickly, no. It's funny that you mentioned that, because the original cut of that scene we had was right after the badge snatch. And I was like, no, you need it. You need that moment to set this whole thing up as a catalyst. And please, Kevin.
Well, no, the only thing I was going to say there was I agree with the badge moment as well. Also, that it's interesting how that scene begins its framing, like, which is very close on their faces, like a shot on on Denzel's face and Ethan's face, and obviously you go down as you mentioned. What I think about that scene as I watch it now is it's actually kind of scary to think about it. I don't even see Denzel on screen there. Like, that's not Denzel. That's the character. Like, he's gone. Like, Denzel's not even there. That character fully there. Like that performance. I know people would argue.
Are we losing him?
I think we
lost. I think Training Day is the best thing he's ever done from a performance standpoint. And going towards say what?
We lost you for a moment, but you're back. You're frozen, but we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I don't know where it got cut off, but basically what all I was saying was that Denzel, to me, from a performance standpoint, he's not there on screen. That's the character. Like, he is fully the character. And as I mentioned, I don't know if it got cut off or not, but I think Malcolm X is the performance that everyone would say that he deserved to win the Oscar for, and I don't disagree with that. But I would personally say that Training Day, it's just the performance for his that I just fully, completely, I think he disappears in it. Like, he is not there. And you could argue that about Malcolm X as well. But I think Training Day, to me, is just the explosiveness of that performance is so incredible. And I genuinely believe that everything that you're seeing on screen, he's giving everything about him, even the spit flying out of his mouth. And, you know, it's a pretty scary scene. I had chills just rewatching it, because that's probably some of the best acting I've ever seen at any point in my life.
I think one of the things that makes it so striking is that Denzel gives it so much context that I just saw a man who was just trying to convince himself. Mm-hmm. That's all I saw. Like, he's so scared that he is like, oh my God. I also love how there's a specific shot. It's like the medium shot, and Ethan Hawke has walked away. We've seen him walk away a couple of times. But then when we come back to that shot, he's replaced by Terry Crews.
Yeah.
And in that moment, you're like, oh yeah, listen, this is it. Like, the buck stops here. And now you have real consequences to deal with, finally. And it says so much. And even just Terry Crews' face, I'm like, oh, this is gonna end so bad.
Yeah. I would love to see David Ayer and Antoine Fuqua work again. You know, with David's writing, because Fuqua all loves to do gritty stuff. You know, just put them back. You wonder why couldn't they get back together? David's obviously gone on to direct, movies, but if he can get back to his writing, like we've seen his movies before, so like put them back together again.
One other thing I find interesting about that scene. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Kevin.
The only thing I was going to say was I would argue that his entire arc happens in that scene. Denzel's character, literally the entire arc of his character happens in that scene. I would argue. I mean, but if you think about it, he basically had the entire film. He's playing it as the character we watched the entire film, very confident, and what Grae just said just now is fascinating, because like he's trying to convince himself. I never even thought about it like that, to be honest with you. But that is the whole arc of the character. right there in that
in
1-2 minute scene.
The facial expressions, the very manic way that he's going between grinning and disbelief and anger. Yeah. Well, it's 7, you guys. We have.
I cut Carla off. Carla had one more thing to say. I'm sorry, just real fast.
No, I was just gonna say to Wilson's comment is that I feel like that was a lightning in the bottle moment between the two of them collaborating. Because as you said, Ayers has gone on to direct, which is Fuqua's lane, so they ain't gonna be directing no film together. So you know what I mean? I think it was a lightning in the bottle kind of situation.
But so is this panel. I mean, this was really wonderful. I thank all of you so much, Grae Drake, Kevin McCarthy, Carla Renata, and Wilson Morales. Thank you so much for joining me for this. I wish we could do it for another hour. I think we have so much more we need to talk about, but that is our time. And this is the Let's Get Critical, the Scenes That Make the Movies panel for the Lakefront Film Festival 2021. I'm your host, Shireen Nicole, and just yay. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Shireen.
Thank you,
Bison.
Thank you. Thank you, fellow Bison.